Hey, what's going on, you guys? My name is the Raptor, and we're testing out a slightly new camera setup, so pray for me. It's been a while since I've done a video where it feels like I'm really talking to you guys, and most of y'all seem to like or hate my controversial opinions video from last year. So today I figured I could expand on that a bit and respond to some of Reddit's hot takes for Death Battle. I don't go on Reddit very often. It scares me sometimes, but considering it's where people tend to be most outspoken, I thought it would be a good place to look, although I will keep all of this anonymous because I don't know who necessarily wants this kind of spotlight. I've also collected a few takes for my YouTube channel members that I feel I have some kind of opinion on, so, you know, if you want to help contribute to future videos, you can click the join button below. I'm sure I haven't brought this up enough already, but I think we're good with all of that. Let's see what you guys got. There is no such thing as a perfect matchup or a perfect opponent for a character. This one is gonna ruffle some feathers early, but I do generally agree with this. I think that most aspects of this community and matchmaking are just too subjective for anything to be literally perfect. And even if you can definitively say that one matchup has better connections or better fight potential than another matchup, there might be other aspects to the matchups that mean more or less to different people. There are just a lot of aspects to matchups that could add or detract from its quality subjectively. I certainly have my own strong opinions about certain matchups, but this is definitely an instance where we need to learn to agree to disagree because it's really hard to change people's minds about this sort of stuff. It's okay to skip Death Battle episodes, just don't be a jerk about it. Yeah, I also agree with this. I think one of the best things about Death Battle is that you have the flexibility to be as engaged or as committed to the show as you want to be. Obviously, if something really doesn't appeal to you or you think it's gonna make you mad or whatever, you don't have to watch what you don't want to watch. I do think sometimes you may be running the risk of missing out on learning about cool new things or an episode being better than you would have otherwise expected, etc. But obviously it is all up to you. Just try not to ruin the experience for those who are excited. There is no such thing as pity points in the categories for Death Battle's conclusions. Well, the disagreements had to start at some point. On the one hand, I get what you're trying to say. The categories themselves don't determine who wins. Death Battle chooses them afterwards by what they feel best represents the comparisons in the fight. But the categories themselves are still often portrayed as having an equal amount of impact on the outcome as each other, which very often just isn't the case. Death Battle can still bring up everything they want to bring up, but they shouldn't be making something like Master Chief's AI advantage feel like it has the same amount of weight as Doomslayer's weapons advantage. This may not be something that breaks Death Battle, because again, they're going to come to their same outcome regardless of how they write the conclusion, but at the end of the day, it's still just another method of them making matchups sound closer than they actually are, and I still think that's a bad thing. Presenting the matchups accurately is still way more important than that. Mario vs. Sonic 3 doesn't need to happen, and the aftermath will be nuclear no matter what. This one's pretty difficult, because on a trivial level, I do agree with both of those statements. I think that Mario vs. Sonic 3 is not absolutely necessary, even if I think it would be pretty cool, and it would probably result in a lot of complaining either way. However, I don't think that second point is a good reason for why Death Battle shouldn't do something. Can you imagine all the episodes we wouldn't have gotten if they were so concerned about the community backlash? In my opinion, one of Death Battle's goals has always been answering the biggest or toughest versus debates when no one else will. So yes, it may get toxic sometimes, but that's part of the territory, and you're able to avoid the internet and avoid the toxicity if you really, really want to. Just remember that. There is no limit to how many times a character can come back to Death Battle as long as they still have a fun matchup. This is another one where I think technically the answer is yes. Death Battle probably doesn't have any sort of agreed upon internal limit, but I still kind of think there should be one because no one wants to see too much of the same stuff on Death Battle. If you want my personal rule of thumb on this, I think any character is welcome for a second episode. There's no problem with that for me. I think getting a third episode requires a really good reason, like them evolving a lot in their media or their previous episodes just not being that good. I don't think there's any defending getting a fourth episode though. That to me is just absurd. Because it's not even that returning combatants are inherently bad, they're obviously not, but when we can instead use all that time to introduce way more new characters and new franchises, it kind of comes back to Why don't we? Why don't we use the large majority of Death Battle's time to do that instead? Characterization in the animation should be judged by if it matches the spirit of the characters while working within the show's limitations and intent of the fight. Yeah, that's pretty well the way I would describe it too. I think characterization is important, but I also think some people take it too seriously sometimes. Like, some people want it to the degree where it would actually get in the way of a death battle being a fight to the death. And I think that does reinforce the idea that some people really prefer crossovers and they watch death battle because that's the closest thing they have to that for some characters. And that's fine if that's what you genuinely prefer, but you have to recognize that that's not really what death battle is. They still have to do what services their main goals first and foremost. People should keep narrative intent in mind when power scaling. I think this kind of depends on what you mean. Like, obviously you need that stuff for understanding the proper context or the overt lore of a series or something. If a feat is very vague, then maybe you can use it to understand what the author was probably getting at. Stuff like that, obviously you can use that. But if you more so mean something like, this feat definitely equates to this level of power, but the writer probably didn't know that, so therefore it should be invalid, that is a slippery slope. There are tons of feats like that where the writer absolutely did not know what they were doing, and aside from extreme outliers and such, we basically have to just take everything at face value because it's still something that the character did. Narrative intent is something that's good to keep in mind for when you need it, but it's not something that's going to overrule everything else. Kamen Rider matchups are getting really annoying. Okay, unfortunately I do kind of agree with this. No offense to Kamen Rider fans, of course, but sometimes it does feel a little too easy, I guess, to make matchups for those characters. And it would be one thing if all of these matchups were created equal and all absolute bangers, but the simple truth is they're not, and yet they're being focused on as if they are. Kamen Riders should get more death battles in the future, obviously, but the amount that they will end up getting will not be proportional to the amount of matchups that people are throwing around right now, because Jesus Christ. Non-vocal tracks make a death battle animation worse. I'm pretty indifferent on this take, to be honest. I can say that I usually don't notice the exact effects the vocals have on an animation during my first watch, like during my reactions, but I can say that I generally prefer vocal tracks over non-vocal tracks on their own, with some obvious exceptions like Ego Death or Halo to Hell if you count that as a non-vocal track, but I guess overall I would say I disagree with the take just because I don't really care one way or the other in the actual fights. Most death battle slander stopped being funny and just turned into people complaining about things they don't like. Oh yeah, no, slander posting is awful. It's rarely ever actually funny, and even if it is, it usually only works if everyone gets the joke, which, knowing this community, they don't, and instead it's just used to unironically fuel their own stupid agendas, which I don't care what anyone says, that is just dumb. Original characters, or OCs, should not be in versus debating. Surprisingly, I have a very specific opinion on this. I feel like, ironically, if you've created an OC for the purposes of versus debating and that's it, then you're kind of already missing the point, because it's not a matter of analyzing a character and seeing how well they do. You're just arbitrarily giving them whatever capabilities you want, probably trying to make them as strong as you possibly can, and to me at least, that just sucks all the fun out of it. That being said, if anyone has an OC that's been in their own short stories and have developed feats and capabilities just by virtue of being in those stories, or something along those lines, and then you decide to put them into versus debating, I think that's perfectly fine, because really that's the way that all characters work, whether they're OC or not. They have their pre-existing material, and then you analyze that, as opposed to just making it up as you go on and trying to have your character win every versus debate that you put them in. People are still too upset about the loss of the fight at the beginning of death battle animations. Is this something that people are still talking about? I'll admit, I used to really miss that fight graphic when it was first taken out, and I guess I still kind of do because it's nostalgic, but I'm definitely not upset about it, and I find that I'm not even really thinking about it that much anymore anyway. Death Battle themselves said they removed it so they had more flexibility in how they can start and set up their fights, and I think that is a really good reason. Granted, given some of their recent animations haven't really had any setups, that does kind of call that into question, but that's a separate nitpick in and of itself. Goku vs. Superman 1 is overhyped, hyped, but amazing for the time. Yeah, I can agree with this to some degree. I definitely think this is one of those episodes where you have to praise it more for its significance and how good it was at the time, rather than holding it up to today's standards, because it is really hard to compare it to a lot of the later episodes or finales that truly are amazing. Granted, I can go back and enjoy it basically any day of the week, and I think it's very fair if you want to call it one of your favorite episodes of Death Battle, but I do think that is mostly thanks to the foundation that it's set up for future episodes. Or maybe you just really remember the first time Death Battle did Goku versus Superman and you really enjoy that memory, which, honestly, fair enough. A character's relevance or popularity really shouldn't determine if they're allowed on Death Battle or not. Would it not in a perfect world? Yes. Do we live in that perfect world? Absolutely not. To be fair, I think allowed is a bit of a strong term. Death Battle's not going to say a character needs to be this tall in order to ride or anything, but they do need to keep in mind what's going to get them clicks. Honestly, I'm happy that they've been able to use as much lesser known material as they've been able to. Especially with them now being independent, they need to prioritize what's going to make them money. They're obviously still going to be using lesser known stuff here and there, but it's not going to be used more than the big stuff. I don't think that's ever going to change. Death Battle would not be as good as it is without Wiz, Boomstick, and other host characters. If you had said something along the lines of Wiz and Boomstick are actually so hilarious all of the time, then I definitely would have disagreed. But honestly, I think that's totally fair. I think they help with the flow of information and making it more engaging to listen to, even if people don't really notice. Now, did it specifically have to be Wiz and Boomstick and Jocelyn and Ringmaster and Dummy? No, I don't think so, but the simple fact of having characters to follow along with does improve the overall experience, in my opinion, and I think those kinds of characters do get some really unnecessary hate. They're not bad characters to have around. This community vastly overestimates how much influence they have on Death Battle. To say they have no influence would be wrong, but yeah. And finally, it's okay for the winner of a death battle to not get their best feats mentioned, to be downplayed, etc. Unfortunately, this is a take that I do very much disagree with. I understand that death battle bringing up all the best stuff for each character is not absolutely necessary for them coming to their conclusion for the matchup at hand. Just because they don't mention something, it doesn't mean they're not aware of it. But I'm honestly finding that to be less and less of a good excuse. I feel like death battle should always prioritize presenting the characters and their best feats as accurately as possible, instead of trying to write the script in the most convenient way possible. I understand that they can't fit in literally everything, but based on the way they describe their mission statement, you would think that them bringing up their best feats and capabilities is implied, so a lot of people who watch the death battles will think that those are their best feats and capabilities, even if they're not. At the end of the day, these are still analyses for each of these characters in a vacuum, not just how you would look at them through the lens of this matchup. Because frankly, if that is what it takes for you to downplay a character or not portray them accurately as far as their capabilities, that's not a good thing. It doesn't matter if they're the loser or the winner. We shouldn't be downplaying a character or treating them unfairly for any reason. I understand some things might be a little too complicated to explain to non-Versus fans, but there are also a lot of times where it feels like Death Battle is aware of the higher feats and they can say them, it would be easy enough to, and they still just don't. I've actually considered making this topic into its own video multiple times before, titled My Only Problem with Death Battle or something like that, but honestly I pretty well summed up all my major issues with it here, so yeah. There you go. And that's a good spot to call it for today. Please let me know if you enjoyed this kind of video, because I could see myself doing more like it. And of course, feel free to share whatever hot takes you want. Like and subscribe if you want to see more from the channel. Massive thanks to my channel members. You guys are the best. I appreciate your support so much. But otherwise, thank you for watching. Have a great day, and peace out.